Throughout our lives, we have been accumulating information from movies, series, books, or any other form of art or entertainment. When you, the writer, sit down to start your story, it's very easy to fall into the narrative trinkets called clichés. Understanding this is very simple. A cliché is an element that through time and repetition isn't novel anymore. Surely, when you watch a horror movie, you know that when a character is about to enter a room and the spooky music starts playing, most likely we will encounter a jump scare. But beware, I'm not saying that scaring is a cliché, but rather the way it's done. It's important to understand that each cinematic genre has rules and structures that are very different from clichés, but that's a topic for another video. Now, what should we do to avoid this? I'm here to present 3 steps that can help you find and destroy this narrative disease that affects our story so much. Number 1. Be an active spectator. Watch movies, plays, or read books. It may seem contradictory that to cure this disease, we have to do what it caused in the first place, being a spectator. But in this case, we need to pay close attention to what's happening. Every time our mind tells us we already know how this will end, or we see that typical scene where the young, in-love girl discovered that her lover only gave her a chance because of a bet with his friends, we need to notice it. We must understand what is happening, and in the best scenario, write it down. So when we read the scenes we have written,
how do you like it?
We will realize that something isn't going well, or maybe we have done a good job avoiding clichés. It's important to understand that this doesn't only work for the things that are grown in the scene, but also for what can be useful to us. We shouldn't only focus on what not to do, we also need to pay attention when something excites us, surprises us, or leaves us perplexed.
You did it. You crazy son of a bitch, you did it.
We need to understand that we are not spectators who get caught up in the moment and feel it. What you have just seen or read is something that has worked, and if your story's world allowed it, it will work for you too. This leads me to the second point. Number 2. Develop and know the world of your story. Developing and understanding the world where your script unfolds isn't just something done in fantasy or sci-fi stories, which present fictional universe, races, and languages. It also happens in a normal story about a contemporary office worker living in the middle of the city. It's important to know the context and rules of your world so we can avoid generic actions, locations, and above all, characters. Let me give you an example. We can find a cliché scene in Twilight when Edward is introduced to us entering the school cafeteria in slow motion, while the voice of a disposable character tells us some information about him and his family. That's it. Suddenly, and without anything memorable or important, Bella is in love. Now, let's compare this to a similar scene but that has a good world development. In Cinema Paradiso, Salvatore meets Elena. He isn't performing an inconsequential action that we won't hear about again. Here, everything is essential. He's filming because the context of the movie is cinema's history. The character grows alongside Cinema Paradiso. For him, the most important thing up to that moment is movies. But while he's filming a shot, he discovers Elena entering the frame. This moment isn't forgettable. Instead, when it's presented again at the end of the movie, it has such emotional weight that is beautiful and painful at the same time. That's why it's so important to know the world of your story perfectly, so the scenes are not copies of copies of copies. And if they still are, it's because perhaps your entire world is a cliché, and you should consider take some steps back and rewrite your story. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, if we have decided to take a specific cinematic genre, it's most likely that we will encounter certain limitations. There are things that should or shouldn't happen in certain genres, and this can be seen as negative, but it's not. Each of these limitations should push us out of our comfort zone to find creative scenes, characters, or actions that allow us to be authentic without losing sense. However, we are not perfect, and our ego can always betray us. That's why the third point is important. Number 3. McKee's exercise and the importance of questioning. Once again, falling into clichés is very easy. We need to understand that this has nothing to do with lack of talent or creativity. It will probably happen to all writers. So we must exercise our brains and find better options or reaffirm that we are on the right path. McKee, in his book A Story, has a very interesting exercise. He talks about how easy it is to get carried away by inspiration to write a scene after a scene. He says, experienced writers never trust so-called inspiration. More often than not, inspiration is the first idea picked off the top of your head. And sitting on the top of your head is every film you have ever seen, every novel you have ever read, offering clichés to plot. To start this exercise, we can outline 5 or 10 scenes that have the same basic action. McKee gives us the example of the lovers' encounter. The most predictable thing will be for them to meet in a bar, and by some weak and forgettable coincidence, they get to know each other. Now, if we write different options and use what we know about our characters, we will probably have more interesting things. For example, one of his alternatives is in the middle of the road and is called Park Avenue. A tire blows out on his BMW. He stands at the curb, helpless in his three-piece suit. She comes along her motorcycle and takes pity on him. She gets out the spare, and as she doctors the car, he plays nurse, handing her jack handle, lock nuts, wheel cover, until suddenly ice meet and sparks fly. We can reach this point because we have built a world beforehand. Surely we know that our character isn't just a girl and nothing else. She's a mechanic, or at least she knows about cars and motorcycles. We have also established that she tends to help people. But if at the moment of writing all we have defined is that she's a girl of certain age and anything else, most likely she will meet her future lover in a bar and no one will care. To finish this exercise, we must choose, and for this we have to go back to our first point. After being an active spectator, we have probably created a vast mental library and filled notebooks with examples in the best case scenario. Having this in mind, we can say, stop, I have seen this scene hundreds of times. This is predictable. My character will never do this, or this scene has nothing to do with the world I'm creating. Of course, writers are not robots, and art isn't a recipe, so there will be always exceptions to what works and what doesn't. Before moving on to the final step of this exercise, I want to say that this doesn't only work for scenes. It can be used to outline characters, actions, and everything that can fall into a cliché. Now, the most important step is deciding which is the best scene for your script. And this is very simple. It's the one that evokes something in you, the one that makes you feel fear, joy, surprise, or sadness. But if your scene doesn't move you in the slightest way, it's likely that the audience won't feel anything either. So yeah, write with your mind and your knowledge, but never forget that a story has to have your heart and soul in it. That's everything for today. Don't forget to give us a like and subscribe. See you at the next one.